The Siege of Toulon, December 17, 1793. Rain falls over the hills west of Toulon. Below them, one of the greatest naval bases in France lies in enemy hands. British and Spanish warships fill the harbor. Their guns protect a city that has turned against the revolution. In the darkness, Republican soldiers climb toward Fort Mulgrave, Little Gibraltar. Behind its earthworks wait British, Spanish, Neapolitan, and Piedmontese troops, supported by naval guns. Among the men moving forward is a 24-year-old artillery officer. Napoleon Bonaparte has spent 3 months preparing for this night. If the fort holds, the Allied fleet can remain at Toulon. If it falls, every ship in the harbor may be forced to leave. This is no longer an argument drawn across a map. This is the moment Napoleon's plan will either survive contact with war or disappear with him. 4 months earlier, France appeared to be collapsing. The execution of Louis XVI had drawn the young republic into war with much of Europe. At home, resistance to the radical government in Paris spread through the provinces. In the south, the removal of moderate Girondin deputies helped trigger a federalist revolt. Toulon was more dangerous than any ordinary rebellion. It contained France's principal Mediterranean arsenal, its naval stores, and a large part of the Mediterranean fleet. Whoever controlled Toulon possessed the maritime gate to southern France. In August, the authorities inside the city turned to France's enemies for protection. An Anglo-Spanish fleet, commanded by British Admiral Samuel Hood, entered the roadstead. The port, its forts, and the French ships anchored within it passed under Allied control. The Royalists recognized the imprisoned son of Louis XVI as king. Toulon's Royalists wanted political survival. Britain wanted the French fleet neutralized. Spain, Naples, and Piedmont joined the coalition. On the map, they formed one Allied position, although they did not always possess a single will. For the Republic, the loss was catastrophic, but taking Toulon back would not be simple. Forts guarded the city, while Allied warships could reinforce threatened sectors with their guns. A direct attack risked driving Republican infantry into fortifications supported by naval artillery. The harbor consisted of 2 connected roadsteads. The Grande Rade opened toward the Mediterranean. The sheltered Petite Rade held the arsenal and anchored fleet. Between them ran a narrow passage. Control the high ground above the Leguyette Peninsula, and artillery could threaten every ship moving through it. Montferrand dominated the city from the north, but the western heights dominated the fleet's ability to remain. 2 Republican forces closed around Toulon. General Jean-François Carteau approached from the west after defeating the Federalist resistance around Marseille. Another force operated east of the city. Their combined task was to isolate Toulon, break its defenses, and recover the fleet. But the Republican siege army had a serious weakness. Its artillery was disorganized. Guns, ammunition, horses, and trained crews were scattered across southern France. The officer originally responsible for the artillery was wounded during fighting at Ollioules. Through a mixture of professional need, political connections, and opportunity, Napoleon Bonaparte was appointed to replace him in September. He did not arrive as the commander of the army. He was not yet a general, and he had never directed an operation on this scale. His authority extended only as far as the guns he could assemble and the commanders he could persuade. Yet artillery gave him a different way to read the battlefield. The obvious objective was Toulon itself. Napoleon focused instead on the harbor. The Allied army depended on its fleet for reinforcement, supplies, and evacuation. The fleet could use the inner harbor only while the narrow passage between the inner and outer roadsteads remained safe. On the western side of that passage stood the coastal forts of Balaguier and Leguyette. Above them rose the Cairo Heights. place Republican batteries on those heights, and their guns could threaten the anchorage and the route through the harbor. The Allies might still possess the city, but their fleet could no longer remain there safely. Napoleon's conclusion was brutally simple. Do not begin by storming Toulon. Seize the ground that made Toulon useful. The first attempt came too early. On September 22nd, Republican troops attacked toward the western positions without sufficient preparation or coordination. The operation failed. More importantly, it warned the Allies exactly where the danger lay. The failure changed the physical shape of the siege. Allied soldiers and sailors dug trenches, raised parapets, and dragged naval cannon uphill. Earth and timber became interlocking positions capable of covering one another. They transformed the Cairo Heights into a fortified zone. At its center stood a large earthen redoubt armed with naval guns and protected by smaller works. The British named it Fort Mulgrave. To the sailors, it was Little Gibraltar. Napoleon's key position had now become the strongest point in the Allied line. He responded by building an artillery system. Weapons were requisitioned from fortresses and arsenals across the region. Workshops repaired damaged equipment. Powder, shot, and tools moved toward the siege lines. Soldiers and civilian laborers constructed platforms, filled gabions with earth, and cut firing positions into the hills. Every gun required transport, a prepared platform, trained crews, and a steady flow of powder and shot. Rain could damage powder, mud could stop wagons, and enemy fire could destroy a platform. Napoleon's task was not simply to collect cannon. It was to create a machine that could continue firing. Individual batteries were not intended to fight separate duels. Together, they would suppress Allied positions, restrict the movement of ships, and prepare the ground for an infantry assault. This was the unglamorous foundation of Napoleon's first success: paperwork, transport, engineering, ammunition, and relentless concentration of fire. From these positions, Napoleon tightened the Western Front. Some guns engaged the fortifications, others covered the water. The aim was not simply destruction. It was to reduce the choices available to the defenders. But guns could not solve the problem of command. Carteau did not fully trust the young artillery officer's priorities. He was replaced, but another attack against Fort Mulgrave failed in November. Every delay gave the Allies more time to strengthen their works. Later legend made Napoleon's solution appear obvious. It was not. Commanders had to protect the entire siege line, while political representatives demanded an attack on the visible symbol of rebellion. Napoleon asked them to accept a paradox. The fastest way to recover Toulon was not to make Toulon the immediate target. Then, on November 16th, General Jacques-François Dugommier assumed command of the Republican Army. Dugommier was experienced, energetic, and willing to listen. He did not surrender command to Napoleon, nor did he simply approve every proposal placed before him. But he recognized the logic of concentrating the decisive effort against the Western Heights. For the first time, Napoleon's artillery plan and the army's operational plan began to work as one. The Allies understood the threat. Before dawn on November 30th, they launched a major sortie against the Republican batteries west of Toulon. British, Spanish, and Neapolitan troops surged forward and temporarily overran part of the position. Guns were captured. Republican crews scattered. The attack could have destroyed weeks of preparation. Instead, Republican forces counterattacked. Fighting spread through the battery works and surrounding ground. The Allied troops were driven back, and British General Charles O'Hara was wounded and captured. Later accounts disagreed over the identity of the individual who took him prisoner. What mattered strategically was that the Republican artillery line survived. The final plan now took shape. Dugommier would attack across a broad front, preventing the Allies from concentrating all their strength in the west. Other Republican columns would threaten positions around Toulon and Montferrand. But the decisive blow would fall on Fort Mulgrave and the Cairo Heights. This was not a plan for artillery to win alone. The guns would weaken the redoubt and cover the approaches. Infantry still had to climb the slope and enter the works, guided by engineers through darkness, rain, and months of construction. The artillery opened an intense bombardment. Batteries struck the redoubt and the works around it, while additional guns sought to keep Allied ships at a distance. Under this fire, assault columns prepared to move through darkness and bad weather. Shortly after midnight on December 17th, the attack began. The first Republican troops met heavy resistance. The slope, mud, darkness, and defensive fire disrupted their formations. Men lost direction. Officers tried to keep the columns moving, while cannon and musket flashes revealed the ground only for an instant. Fort Mulgrave did not fall to a single elegant maneuver. It was taken through repeated assaults and close fighting. Napoleon moved forward near the action to direct artillery support. During the struggle, he was wounded in the thigh. The injury was not fatal, but it was a reminder that the officer who had calculated ranges on a map was now inside the violence created by those calculations. Republican troops finally broke into the Allied works. Fort Mulgrave fell. The lower positions at Balaguier and Les Guillettes could no longer be held. At dawn, Republican guns occupied the heights above the harbor passage. The tactical problem had been solved. The Allies still held Toulon, but they could no longer safely hold the fleet inside it. Admiral Hood ordered an evacuation. The withdrawal became a race against time. Allied troops embarked under the threat of French artillery. British parties attempted to remove or destroy French warships, naval stores, and sections of the arsenal that could not be carried away. Fire spread across the harbor. Explosions illuminated the city. Britain could not allow the Republic simply to recover every ship handed over in August. Vessels that could be sailed away were taken. Others were burned or disabled. But the evacuation was not only a naval operation. Thousands of Toulonnais who had supported the revolt crowded toward the ships, knowing that Republican victory could mean imprisonment or death. Not everyone could escape. Families reached the waterfront with whatever they could carry. The coalition had entered Toulon promising protection. Now its ships represented the only path away from the returning Republic. By December 19th, Republican forces had re-entered Toulon. Victory did not bring reconciliation. Revolutionary authorities renamed the city and unleashed severe reprisals against those accused of treason. Later, anti-Napoleonic propaganda placed Napoleon personally at the center of the killings, but that image is misleading. He had departed before the principal massacres began. The victory also came at a naval cost. The Allies had not destroyed the entire French Mediterranean fleet, but they had taken or burned a significant part of it and damaged the arsenal. Toulon had been recovered, yet the consequences of its occupation could not be erased in a single night. For Napoleon, however, the transformation was immediate. He had not commanded the siege, and he had not won it alone. Dugommier made the final operational decision. Republican infantry captured the forts. Engineers, laborers, artillery crews, and political representatives all shaped the outcome. But Napoleon had identified the decisive relationship between terrain, artillery, and naval power. He had built the batteries needed to exploit it. And when commanders changed and attacks failed, he continued to argue for concentration against the same essential point. 5 days after the assault, Napoleon Bonaparte was promoted to brigadier general. At 24, the Corsican exile from the previous episode had become one of the youngest generals of the French Republic. Toulon established the pattern that would follow him through the next years. Find the point on which the enemy system depends, concentrate overwhelming force there, and turn a local success into a larger collapse. It also taught him that military success had to be witnessed and reported. Representatives of the convention had observed his work. Dugommier praised his conduct. At Toulon, battlefield achievement and political opportunity met for the first time, but military success did not make Napoleon safe. Revolutionary France consumed generals almost as quickly as it created them. The political allies who had helped his rise would soon fall, and Napoleon himself would be arrested. His next struggle would not begin behind a cannon. It would begin with survival.